Okay. Kum learn the Black Gemara. We are up to today the Lamed Aleph, Omer Aleph, top of the page, and we are talking about the last thing we talked about was the Shira of the day of Rosh Hashana, why we are so concerned about it, and Rabbi Yechim Mezakas Takana. That today, now that we're in English, we can accept 80 more throughout the day. So the Gemara now is going to go on a tangent and talk about the different shiras that we say. And that they in the base of Mikdash, and which is what we say today here as well. So Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Ayman. Rabbi Yehuda says Mishum Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda says name Rabbi Akiva. Barishan in the beginning, Maha Ayman. What would they say? The first day. Just get. What do we say? On the first day, La Hashem Ha'aretz Mulay. This is a lot of mizman that we say in Rishon. La Hashem Ha'aretz Mulay, because that's the day that Eibishter created the whole world. Hashem Shekona V'Hikne V'Shalit Ba'Olam. This is the day that the Eibishter basically formed the whole world, and he gave the world to the people in the future. And the Eibishter in total control on his own. On the second day, what do we say? That's Shem Mizna Lekelech. We say the Godel Hashem Humuhula Ma'oid. The Eibishter. 1 second. The Godel Hashem Humuhula Ma'oid. That. Are you being blocked by something? Something comes up on my screen.
No, it's all good.
1 second. No.
Okay. So God Hashem Amul Ma'oid. Why does it say? Why do we say that capital that the Eibishter is great? Al Shem Shechilik Ma'isa, because this is the day. On the second day, the Eibishter separated the heavens from the earth. Right? He separated the Kia between the Maila and the Maila. This is the day. It doesn't say Kitev, and the Eibishter sort of elevated to the Maila. B'shlishi on the third day. What do we say? Shishayim on the third day. But Levim said then. I mean, they would say Mizon Asav Elikim Nitzav Badas Kel. Why do we say that? Hashem, because Shegila Aretz, he revealed the earth, and that's when you saw the separation between the Yabosh and the Yam, the Chachmase with his Chachma, the Heichen Tevel La'ados. He prepared the world for the community. The Revi on Wednesday, I mean, say Kel Nikomes Hashem. The Eibishter takes it to vengeance. Why that day? Hashem Shebora Chamol Lavana. That's the day the sun and the moon were created, and so it should be a positive thing. But the Osidli Poramev Day, there'll be idol worshippers who will worship the sun and the moon, and the Eibishter will punish them. So he brings up Kel Nikomas Hashem. And B'Chamishi on Thursday we say Lam Latzeach. We say Haninu Leikim Uzeinu. This is what we spoke about before. It talks already about Hari, it talks already about Shefer, and that's why we didn't want them to Shana to repeat it twice and repeat it different on Thursday. If the day that we think is likely to be Rosh Hashanah is on Thursday, they would say a different share in the morning. They would say the second half of it, starting from talking about Hasireisi Misebo Shichmai, which that's where they started from, talking about Yosef being released from prison. So Haninu Elokim Uzenu Hashem Shebora Oifes V'Dogim. He created all the different birds and fish l'shabeach l'shmai to praise the Eibishter. And when a person sees so many species of birds, we praise the Eibishter. Rashi learns. I'm talking about the birds themselves, but we do. B'shishi on Friday, we say Hashem Malach Lavish. Why? Hashem Shegam Malach. Because the Eibishter completed all of his work. U'Malach Aleim. And in fact, Adam Rishon is the one who said Hashem Malach Lavish, accepting upon himself the crown of the Eibishter. B'Shvi, what do we say on Shabbos? That's when we say Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. But instead of being about the past, what the Eibishter did, it's the Yom Shekula Shabbos. It's envisaging what's going to be in the future when Mashiach will come. That there will be the whole world will be desolate after the year 6000, and everything will be resting. Amram said, "Ma'ro Chacham doesn't make sense. Why would the Chacham deem it fit l'chali ben a between the Shish and Yom of every day and Shabbos? Why would you make a difference? Everything we talk about the past, and suddenly Shabbos talk about the future." Ella Barishan, I'll agree with you in the first 6 days, and it repeats all over again. Barishan Shekhan Hikne V'Shabel Lama that Eibishter acquired the world that he's ruling on his own. B'Sheni Chilik Ma'asav, he separated the waters, U'Malach Aleim, and he ruled over them. And that's why the end of Abish has been elevated. It's like Godel Hashem Umoid Shlishi Shigila B'Chachmasai. Then the earth is seen separate from the border. The Heichen Tevel Adosa. That's what Das Kel. But on Wednesday, Shabbat Chamal Abonavos is part of my day, and he will punish those who worship the sun and the moon, kill the Kamas. The Chamishi Shabbat Shabbat Lishmoy to praise his name. So therefore, we say the Haninu. And Beshishi on Friday, Shagama Malachta, Yom Malach Aleim. There's Hashem Malach. But Shvi, nothing to do with Lashon Lavi, Al Shem Shavas, because he rested in the past. So what's going on here? What is the machlekes between the two? Now, Mizmashil Yom Shabbos, if it talks about the future, they're talking about Yom, one day, and each day is a millennium, so 1,000 years. So the question is, will the world after 6,000 years, the world is going to last for 6,000 years? Is the world then going to be desolate? Begashmias, just for 1,000 years or 2,000 years. If you learn it'll be desolate for 1,000 years, then Mizmashili Yom HaShabbos is talking about the future. If you learn that the world will be desolate for 2,000 years, then Mizmashili Yom HaShabbos is not talking about the future, it's talking about the past. And that's the machlekes. Ukemifli arguing between Rav Katina and Abaya. The Amar of Katina says, Shita Alfishni Hava the world will last for 6,000 years, and we're now 5,782. The Chad Chruf. Then 1,001 millennia, the world will be empty, desolate. Shemar, it says, "V'nizgav Hashem levada b'yemahu." He will be alone by Yemahu, one day, one millennia. But Abaye says Trech will be 2,000 years, and because it will be 2,000 years, then Mizmashirli Yom HaShabbos cannot be talking about the future. Shemar says, "V'chayenu me'yemaim." After 2 days, he will give us life, and he commanded v'nichilafanu. We are meshlishi nilafanu. The third day we'll wake up. No, it was the first 2 days. Each day is a millennia. For 2,000 years, the world won't. So therefore, according to Abaya, according to Maya, you can't do that. According to Maya, the Mizmashil Shabbos must be talking about the past, not the future. Then the Gemara says further, the Musafi, the Shabbat Maya, what would they say in the Musaf of Shabbos? They said the following: Haziv Loch. Haziv Loch is very interesting. I'll tell you a second what those statements is. Just like they divided Hazinu there in the base of Mikdash, that's how they divided in the Shul. So the Gemara says, first the Gemara says here that they used to read it only on Musaf and Shabbos. So they would split Hazinu 6 sections, and Musaf Shabbos every week they would say another section. For some reason, the Tush of Aruch Bes Yosef says that Hazinu, in Simon Ches, is read every single day, 6 days of the week, which is not like our Gemara here. But what's Haziv Loch? Haziv Loch is a Tavis, and here we see an interesting thing, that not only that Sheni Shlishi Revi, B'chlal, as you know, that apart from Hazinu, all the other parts of Sheni Shlishi Revi were done by the Goyim, not by us, and you look at it, you see a lot of them don't make sense, because you see that sometimes Sheni Shlishi is right in the middle of the story, and if you wait 3 more psukim, the story ends, and they didn't. And in fact, in Minchas Elazar says that you're not allowed to stop anywhere where they stopped. You're not allowed to stop Sheni because it's a goyish thing. You should make your own aliyas, and that's why sometimes you'll see that the Al-Qaeda will finish at a spot which is different than what Al-Chumash has. So they're different minhagim, but in Hazinu, the Gemara says he's supposed to stop in the following Rosh Hashanah, Haziv Loch, and there's a big machlek, like 6 opinions as to what Haziv Loch stands for. Well, Rashi is interesting. I'll tell you why. Rashi says that Haziv Loch is Rosh Hashanah as follows. He says you divide the first 3 parshas 6 psukim each. So the Hay is Hazinu, obviously. The second one is the Zion, which is Zechayr, every 6 psukim, so that's 6 psukim later, which is Zion, Zechayr, which is Sheni. And then he says here, the third one is Yar Kiveyu Abamas Yar, 6 psukim later, that's pasuk 13, that's Shlishi, which is what we have over here. Then he says that the fourth one is Vayar Hashem Vayinatz, and that's 6 psukim later, and that's all correct. That's how we have it in our Chumash. Then he says, then from now on it's 8 psukim. So the next one is Lamed, stands for Lulei, right? It stands for Lamed is Lulei. Lulei Kas Oyev, right? Which is 8 psukim, which is it is not by the way we do it. We do it the next one, Lu Chachmu Yaskilu, which we follow the other Shayim. And then the Shishi is Ki Yodin Hashem Amai. Kaf is Ki Yodin Hashem Amai. But from Kiyodin, from the pasuk Lulei Kas, where Rashi learned, so Kiyodin is actually 9 psukim, not 8. And that has baffled everybody. So there is a Gemara tradition that we're not even Baki in psukim, forget about anything else. And it seems that Rashi's psukim and Hazinu were different than our psukim. So he has what he counts as 8 in our chumash is counted as 9. Haziv and other Shem have different tastes. Brings right away, which I can say from a different one. And the above is by Yishman, all different cheshbonos. But the Haziv loch means that loch is the 50. Is 50. We learned before that the 50 Shar Bina was only given to Moshe when he passed away, and Haziv is the Ziv of Moshe, and we're praying in Hazinu that Moshe Rabbeinu should come back. It says in the Lubavitch Svarim that's a big Indian to know Hazinu B'Heart. Lucia Maggid said that everybody should learn Hazinu B'Heart. It cleanses your soul, and we read it Shabbos Tshuva because it brings out Tshuva because it's quite harsh. Hazinu is quite harsh. In fact, this is the only parsha. Everywhere else we say we never want to finish at a harsh note. And Hazinu, we didn't really care because so a number of the parshas finish off part of the Teichah of Hazinu. Anyway, then we continue. The Mincha the Shabbat Mahayim. What is the Mincha Shabbos? They said the following. They said this is the Levim in the Beit HaMikdash. They would say Oz Yosher, then they would say Mika Meicha, and then they would say Oz Yosher the Ali Be'er Enullah, which is the end of Parsha Chukah. So they have 3 different things that said, and they said it every week. They said something else. Iboilu. So the question now is, so they're going to discuss what I just said. Hani Kulu B'Chad B'Shabbat Ranu. They said all these 3 every Shabbos. Aydil L'Kol Shabbat V'Shabbat or Omri Chad. Every Shabbat they said one. One Shabbat said Oz Yosher. The next one said Mika Meicha Be'er Hashem, and the next one said Ali Be'er. So Hashma coming here. Tanya B'Reisi Ad Shahadi Shein Emedes. Achas, that the Hazinu was split up in 6 weeks is Shniya Chazerish time. So by Mincha, they said whatever they had to say, they covered it twice. In other words, they said Oz Yoshir 1 week, Mika Meicha next week, and that'll be a 3rd week, and then they repeat it again. So in 6 weeks, they said it twice, while Hazinu said once. Shma Mino, Kol Shabbat V'Shabbat Amri Chad. Shma Mino. So proof of me, they said every Shabbat is 1. Amri Vida, but Yom Yechiran, Esem Masoy is Nosa Shchina. So we're talking about the Churban Beis Hamikdash. We're saying now how it evolved. Now we're talking about the Bayis Rishon, how the Eibush slowly slipped away from the Beis Hamikdash. Mikroi, we learn from Psukim. Who connect on corresponding to that in the second Beis Hamikdash, Golsa, Sanhedrin, Bigamot. We have a tradition. They did 10 different voyages, trips. Esem Masay Lazachina. There were 10 trips that the Eibush made. Mikroi. Basically, went from Kapoides to the Kruv. The Eibush left the Kapoides on top of the Aron, which has Muslim Psukim, and he moved to the Kruv. Now we're talking about Shlomo Melech built 2 Kruvim on the floor, standing next to the Aron. So it moved to the 2 Kruvim, and then from one Kruv to the next. Where's the sorry, what's the place? Umekruv the Kruv. It went from one Kruv on one side of the Aron to the other Kruv, the other side of the Aron. Too much Shlomo Melech was standing on the floor. From the Kruv went into the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash. From there, it went to the courtyard between the Beis Hamikdash and the Mizbeach. That's the Azorah, the Ezra's Kohanim. From the Chatzah, then moved to Mizbeach, the outer Mizbeach, the Gag. From there, it went to the roof. From the Gag, and from the roof Gag, to the wall. Every time the Eibush is distancing himself further and further, he's waiting for the people to do tshuva, and it's not happening. He moved further away. From the city, he went to the mountain, and from the mountain, to the midbar. And the Eibush found it very hard to lead the Beis Hamikdash in one go. He left very slowly, hoping that the people would be a wake-up call, and people would do tshuva. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Midbar also Midbar, he went to Hasina, then he went back to the original place. Now, Mishnema, what are the Psukim? Muslims say, Eile Choshum, can go back in place. Mikapai the crew, Mifnich says, I originally spoke to you from the Kapaitis, and that's where the crew were as well. It says, Vayakiv, and then he said he rode on the crew, like Yoichin flew away. So we see he went from the Kapaitis to the crew. It says, we went off the crew, El Miftan Abais went to the entrance to the house. Miftan the Chatzes, when they went to the courtyard, as it's kind of received, the Mali Habayis has unfilled the entire house with clouds. The Chatzes, Malaya, as Nega Kvod Hashem, and and Rashi says this all started from the times of Yecheskel, and it stayed there for a while, and then it started moving up further and further. It started in his times. Anyhow, Molas Nega Kvod Hashem, And Mechotzel and Mezbeach, so he said Hashem, Nishal, I saw the Abish standing on his Bech. Mezbeach, like Gag to the roof. See him, trailer shows up in the Gag, is better, I'd rather sit up in the Gag on the corner of the roof. Abish is reprimanded. And Megag, Lechaim, see, in Hashem, Mitzvah, Chimas, in and he stood there on the wall. And then Lechaim, Le'ir, Chsib, Kail Hashem, Le'ir, Yikra. And the Abish sound came from the city. Me'ir, Lahar, Chsib, Vayal, Hashem, Al, Teicheir, Vayam, went to the mountain, Hashem, Mekedem. On the east side of the city, from the mountain, better to sit out there in the wilderness. We see the Abish is moving about. Also we went back to the original place. I'll go back to the original place. 6 months the Abish waited in the midbar. He was hoping and that the Eden will do tshuva finally, so he can come back. When the Abish saw that still, even though the Shechina left the base of Mikdash, it was now in the midbar, and yet no one really cared, and no one's doing tshuva. He then said that Tifeach Atzman, let their bones or let themselves rot. And it says, the hope is will just dissipate. So therefore, this is there were 10 goyim so that the Shechina left base of Mikdash. Connect, that's the first base of Mikdash. Connect done by the second base of Mikdash. Golsa Sanhedrin Bigamara. Sanhedrin also moved about, but that's more tradition. What is that? First, Melishchas Hagozis, which was the chamber there, were not the base of Mikdash, and where half was Kodesh, half wasn't, where the Sanhedrin sat. From there they went to Lechanus. They were little in the Harabayas, they were little like storefronts. And there they sat because they no longer judge capital punishment, as we learned. We learned that 40 years prior to the Churban Beis HaMikdash, they stopped because murder was so rife that they felt that they were killing too many people. And so they had these Chanois. Then they moved to Yerushalayim from Yavne. Then when they moved to Yavne after the Churban, Yavne they moved to Usha. From Yavne they moved to Usha. From Usha they moved back to Yavne. We're not sure exactly what happened and why they kept them moving. Yavne Usha went back again to Usha. So we don't really know the history here. What happened? Usha l'Shafraim. These are the different regions. Shafram l'Beisha Arim. Beisha Arim to Tzapoidi. Tzapoidi l'Tveria. Tveria Amuka Mekulim. And he says here that Tveria was, I guess, the lowest place. But they used to also go to a place called Tzapoidi, which was like on top of the mountain. We're looking at Shabbos there. That at that Tveria were the first people to bring in Shabbos because it got dark there like with anywhere else. Okay, and then then they went from the so because Tzapoidi, remember, is the top of the mountain, and there Shabbos left the latest. Rabbi Yeshi said, "I wish I was like the people of Tveria to accept Shabbos when they accept Shabbos, and I'll be like the people of Tzapoidi to let Shabbos leave." That was the latest. They were on top of the mountain that they were able to see the sun a lot longer. And Haino Tveria was the lowest point. Remember, it says, "Shefalt me'eres tedabedi." Shefalt, when you will fall down or you will sink down, and me'eres tedabedi, you will speak to us from the ground or from the land. Rabbi Loza says no. Sheish goes. Abelazar says there are only 6. Remember here we had Yavna Usha, Yavna, Avna Usha. He says there are only 6. Shnema, because it says in the pasuk, Ki hashach yeshrei morim, that he will bring down all those who sit very high up. Kirya Nizbo Yashpilena, again, those who sit very, very high up. He is going to the very chashuv city. He is going to lower you. Yashpilena, you lower you ad edis until the ground. Yagiena, you will reach ad offer until the dust. So there's 6 different lowerings. Amar Rabbi Yechon says, even though we reach the dust, which is the lowest level, like today we're called Ikvus of the Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach, nevertheless, Misham Masidin Ligo, that's where the Geula is going to happen. Remember it says, Hisnadi me'offer kumi, that I will take you from the sand, I will lift you, Shvi, and then you can sit down in Yerushalayim and so on. So that's the Geula. So we reach the lowest point, the nether, and therefore we're going to there's only one way forward. That's going up. So this is the Nadir. Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yechon said, we'll go through all the takanos of Rabbi Yechon Bezakai. There's another takan Rabbi Bezakai made. The Rosh Bezdin usually Kiddush HaChodesh, who's the ultimate decider, the head of the Bezdin. But if he moves about, you don't have to follow the Rosh Bezdin. So they have to go to where the Bezdin is convenient. And even though the Rosh Bezdin is required, they don't have to schlep around after the Rosh Bezdin. The Gemara's question is this only a din in Kiddush HaChodesh or in any Bezdin setting, commercial dispute, whatever it is? You don't have to run after the Rosh Bezdin, you just go to the Bezdin itself. Says the Gemara, Yitz was a woman. The Zamladin is that she was subpoenaed to go to court, someone to go to a Bezdin, Kameda Mem for Mem and the Doy, Osla Mem, Luchuzabim. Well, Mem had for whatever reason had to go to Mechuzav, Osla, but say she didn't want to follow him. Because the Ptisha Layo, so he put like a star sira, which means someone who refuses to go to Bezdin, and then all the punishment goes after her, chedim and all that. I'm the Rosh Hashana. What are you talking about? But not now. We learned in our mission. I feel a Rosh Bezdin, even though you're the Rosh Bezdin. The Chom Makom when you're traveling. So the Eidim Hochim Elevok Avad. The Eidim don't have to follow. They can just go to the Makom Avad. That's talking about Eidim HaChodesh. That's only talking about Eidim HaChodesh that we make it easier for the Eidim, because otherwise. Otherwise, you're gonna the Eidim will say, "What a schlep! I'm not coming back again." Over here, Eved Loiva Ishmalva. Here, the saying is that the Loiva is indebted to the Malva, and therefore he has to follow the lender around. And if the lender has to go to the Av Bezdin, they have to follow the Av Bezdin around. And that's the din. We're looking at Russian Hedron that the lender is the one who decides where the Bezdin will be, not the borrower. So the machlek is whether this is only limited to a case of a loan, because you have a pasuk eved leiv lishmalva, or any din Torah, not even a loan, partnership dispute, whatever it is, any din Torah, you have to follow somebody summoned. They have to go after the Abbezin, even if he moves town in the middle, he has to follow them as well. Another takana of Yechon Zakai, ein kahanim rashayin lalud b'sandalein l'duchnik. Kohanim cannot go with their sandals. That's why they took the shoes off for duchnik. And what's the reason? Gemara Seit will tell us. Because if let's say a shoelace rips and the kohen will bend down to fix the shoe, everybody will look and they'll see they won't see him and they'll think that he absconded, and they'll start peddling all kinds of rumors about him. It's not really a kohen or whatever it is, pagam. So we don't want that to happen. We cannot feed the fodder to people that we know that enjoy gossiping. Zu echad mitesha takanas is one of the 9 takanas. Come in. One 9 takanas. She's the high pirka, the 6th that we learned in this pedicure, all the different takanas that we had, and the chod of the pirka kama. We had over here that that you blow by a bezdin, and that a lulav is taken for 7 days, right? Even though the Tanya was finished only from 1 day, he said 7 days, and that yom hanaf, the entire 2nd day of Pesach, we shouldn't eat from the new crop, and that you should what do you call it? Mikabel it all day, and and the Eidim have to go to where the bezdin is sitting. And then he said, there's another takana he made actually in the first page as well, that you're not mechal Shabbos only for the months of Nisan and Tishrei. And there's another takana he made. So we're listing all the different takana Zaka made. And they say, if you've written this photo, it says Habir Zaka in a way made sure that Yiddishkeit continues, because after Churban Beis Hamikdash, you can imagine how despondent the people were, and he maintained all of these rules, and he perpetuated in a way Yiddishkeit, or safeguarded Yiddishkeit so that it should continue. Another one is a Tanya we're learning our Krisis that a ger is gayed is manazeh. A ger that in those days the requirement for a ger was to go to mikveh, have a bismillah, kabbalah's mitzvahs, but also had to bring a carbon. We're going to set of twin birds, and but just like by Har Sinai, they had to go through all that, and they also had to sprinkle the blood. So the same thing today. Also, you have to go through a carbon. And the problem is there are no kabbalas today. So what do you do? So we said over here, you should set aside a certain amount of money. So you have to set a certain amount of money to buy birds. I'm not sure. So Shlomo says, said, not a good idea. You know why? You're going to have money set aside, which is consecrated. Whatever you forget, you use it for yourself. You'll be even aveda. It's better not to have it. So, and the Rambam already mentioned that everything Sichas explains by Arichas that this is not a shortcoming in Gadim. Then, so if they don't have a carbon, that means the way that believes is at the time when you needed a carbon, if you don't have a carbon, it was missing and you weren't a complete ger. But today, because it's not possible to bring a carbon, then it's not a chsaron at all in the gatus, and the gatus is 100%, even though you don't have a carbon. The Ida plukte the Papa of Nachma Yitzchak. And the other takana is an argument between a Papa and Nachma Yitzchak, what exactly the takana was. A Papa says, Kedem Levai. The Papa said the argument is all about, sorry, the other thing was all about Kedem Levai. Remember, the fourth year you cannot eat from the produce, from the grapes. You have to bring with you to the Shalim. And it's a big schlep, so you used to be able to transfer the kedusha of this of Kedem Levai to money, and they take the money with the Shalim and then buy whatever you want over there and celebrate. Rabbi Yechim Bezaka will make a special takana that if you live within one day of Yerushalayim, bring the grapes themselves, because it's so nice to see fruits and everything else adorn the marketplace of Yerushalayim. It's bustling and it makes the place look teeming with life and energy, and that's how it should be. That was the takana. Nachmisa says Loshen shows the haters. Nachmisa, the takana was all about no. Look on Yom Kippur, they used to have there that ribbon they used to put around the Sir Shaleach, and if it turned white, then they knew that the Avedas were forgiven. If it turned red, that means they're in trouble. And initially they had it in the base of Mikdash. Everybody can see, and you can imagine if it turned red, how disturbed they were. They ruined the rest of Yom Kippur. If it was, so they brought it inside, but people still noticed, so that they tied it around the neck and the horns of the tied around the horns of the Sim Shaleach. So only person who saw was the person who threw him out, the Ishiti, the person who threw him down the cliff. And by the time he came back and to report, it was already Yom Kippur was already over. So the Gemara explains. It's a day's walking distance to go to Shalim. These are the distances. Eilat min Hatzafon actually means min Hadam. You know, Eilat is in the south. Very difficult. It does not. It's impossible to walk from Eilat to Shalim in one day. A person can walk 40 kilometers. The distance from Eilat to Shalim is a lot greater than 40 kilometers. And this is part of the whole machlekes as to whether Eilat is part of Israel or not, right? So some people say Eilat is part of Israel. Some people say Eilat, and therefore you only keep one day Yom Tov. Some people say it's not part of Israel, and they bring an eye from Tanakh that Eilat is part of Israel. Others say just the opposite. We see the Gemara right here that the Eilat must be two Eilats. The Eilat that we have today can't be the Eilat because, and the Tanakh one is this one here, because it says it's a day's walking distance on the south, which it is in south. It's not a day's walking distance, not 40 kilometers from Yerushalayim. Then he says, Akravat Minatzafan, Lud Minamai, Lud on the west of Yerushalayim, and Yarden Milamizrach. And the Yarden on the east. What's the reason? Why did he say if you live within a day's walking, you have to bring the original grapes? To adorn the marketplace line with fruits. The time you learned, Rabbi Eliezer had a kedem, had a vineyard or vineyard on the east of Lud, which is halfway between Lud and Yerushalayim. Kvartevi, right next to Kvartevi, Ubikish, Rabbi Eliezer loved Kilani, Rabbi Eliezer wasn't able to bring it within Yerushalayim. And Rabbi Yechim said you have to, so therefore he wanted to make it hefke, so the poor people should then take it with them and they'll bring it to Yerushalayim. Your friends already nominated B'tirua, and they already said you don't have to water it anymore. Rabbi Yechim Mezaki said that you don't have to worry. Since now the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, there's no big inyan anymore to adorn Yerushalayim. That's interesting, because everything Rabbi Yechim Mezaki did was to remember all the Zeichel Mikdash, and here he sort of gave up. He said Yerushalayim, unless he didn't want people to come to Yerushalayim, every time they go to Yerushalayim, if he forced them to go and they'll see the Churban Mikdash, it will just evoke by them sadness, the contrary to what he's trying to achieve with all the other takanas he made. Everything else was Eichel Mikdash. So therefore he said, you know what, we're not going to force anybody to go to Yerushalayim. We can cancel this takana that you have to bring the grapes with you. The takana was for years, but prior, while the Beis Mikdash was upstanding, and then it would be a cover to the Yerushalayim, to the Beis Mikdash. But now the Beis Mikdash is destroyed, he said there's no point in going up to Yerushalayim. And the story was about this particular material. The time we learned a bit of showing in the beginning, they used to hang it up on the outside of the Beis Mikdash. Hail bin if it turned white, and everybody rejoiced. Like Hail if it did not turn white, remained red. Yet some they were depressed. His ginu, they decided it's not, and we don't want people to be pressed on Yom Kippur, so they're just doing it inside. People still looking, peering inside, and they would see Hilbin, if there was white, they were happy, like Hilbin, it remained red, they were upset, and they would tell everybody. They're tied around half around the boulder, like half around the horn, and therefore nobody knew about it until Yom Kippur was over. My time Papa. Why doesn't he say like a Papa do with Kerem Levi that he canceled this thing about the grapes? If you think Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai, Chaved of the Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi have, how can it be that Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai made that takana? If Rabbi Yechon made that takana and they're telling Rabbi Eliezer, don't worry about it, it would have been canceled, they would never have referred to Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai as your friend. Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai was Rabbi Eliezer ben Hukn's Rebbe, not his friend. So Papa is not deterred by that because he says even though Taka he was his Rebbe, even Talmidim have who's talking to Rabbi Eliezer, his own students. To his students, Rabbi Eliezer was the greatest guy in the world. So they even Rabbi Eliezer Rebbe, they didn't see him as a Rebbe. They saw him as a peer of Rabbi Eliezer because that's how Talmidim should be. Talmidim should believe that their Rebbe is the greatest, and that's why they're learning from him. So even though Rabbi Eliezer acknowledged that his Rebbe Yechon was his teacher and mentor, nevertheless, the Talmidim of Eliezer ben saw everybody else merely as a Chaved, equal, not superior. So that's why they can call him Chavei Recha. It's not common to say to Rebbe, your Rebbe. That's why Papa was deterred. Now, Papa, my time, why does he learn to Lashon Zayis? Because he believes Rabbi Yechon, Lashon ben Zayis is only in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai in the times of the Beis Hamikdash was too young to be considered then the great Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai. What do you mean? Did it even happen? Why not? Why didn't it happen? Because in Tanya we learned he lived for 120 years. And it's interesting, the way Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai's life is divided is exactly the way Rabbi Akiva's life is divided, a Talmud of a Talmud. Mem Shana also the first 40 years Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai did not spend, he doesn't say anywhere he was in Amaretz, but he didn't spend learning, he was in business. Then Mem Shana Lama. Then he took the next 40 years after he made his money and he sat and he learned Bas Modesh Rabba. And the last 40 years of his life, Mem Shana Limit. The last 40 years he taught. The Tanya, and so what? So why can't it be the last 40 years? We know that Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai lived while the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and he lived a couple of years afterwards because he made all these takanas after the Churban Beis Hamikdash. But maybe he passed away 2 years after Churban, so he was the leader of Klal Yisrael the last 40 years of his life. And if he was the leader of Klal Yisrael the last 40 years of his life, why couldn't he make the takana about the L'shon Shazahidus? The problem was that 40 years prior to the Churban by Sheni, they stopped it. Because the Gemara says, "V'tanya mem shanach koinish l'bayit v'hilashoyt v'malbin elamadim." They no longer became white. The nest no longer happened. It remained its original color, remained red, and therefore he wouldn't have made this takana to a point anymore. He had to make it before 40 years. But before 40 years, he was just an ordinary. He was a Talmud. He wasn't yet the famous Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai. But now we learn he's Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai. So we know for a couple of years he lived after the Churban, only a couple of years, and therefore he was a leader only within the 40 years prior to the Churban, not prior to that. Even the 40 years when he was learning. Talmud Yoishi Lifnei Rabba. He wasn't just a Talmud. He was a Talmud sitting before his Rebbe, and he constantly ventured his ideas. If he said something, he stopped at time and made sense, and his Rebbe accepted it. Who was his Rebbe? Hillel. And his Rebbe accepted it and put it out there. We don't know who his Rebbe, because Hillel did not live. We know that Hillel was his Rebbe, but Hillel did not live 40 years, 42 years before, unless he did as soon as he became a Talmud, which was 80 years. We know that Hillel reigned 100 years before the Beis Hamikdash for a number of years. Unless this is talking about the early years of Yechon ben Zakkai. I mean, like 75 years before the Churban Abayis or something. He when he was a Talmud, in the early years, he already had good ideas, and Hillel accepted it, and they passed it on. And by the way, in the Gemara we had in Sukkah there, the Chesed, but it says that the greatest Talmud of Hillel was Genesis ben Azil, and Yechon ben Zakkai was the smallest Talmud of Hillel, and yet he became the Nasi B'Yisrael, as we see here, and all the takanas he made. But the Kesef Mishnah and the Rambam finds it very hard to imagine that the smallest Talmud of Hillel became the Nasi B'Yisrael. So he has like a different understanding of the Gemara there. Anyway, so this completes all the takanas of Yechon ben Zakkai, and tomorrow we go back to Shofros to see all the Takanas of Shafris. Okay, we'll stop here. I'll continue tomorrow.